So I think we can go ahead. Let's start.
Right about now, the Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, the Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, the Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now, the Funk Soul Brother. Right about now, the Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now.
Hello, today it's Radio Entrepreneurship by INSEAD Alumni, and today, unfortunately, Sabrine Monsegur from the INSEAD Max Center is not here for any reason, that's life, but I'm not by myself, far from it, because I am with Eveline Buchatskyi live from Boston. Am I right?
Yes, I'm in Boston.
Okay, hi Eveline, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here.
It's cool. There are many reasons why you're here. So first, it's so no one really cares, but we know each other for quite a long time because we did the INSEAD together 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, and you made so many things since then because you've been traveling all around the world. You've been working and living in Ukraine. You spent some years in the US, and you are still in the US in Boston. You've been working with Techstars as a director at Techstars, which is congratulations, it's very great. So, and now it seems that you are something new and very exciting. So it's a very bad summary I've just done. Can you introduce yourself a little bit better than I've just done?
Yeah, sure. So yes, we met at INSEAD. Before INSEAD, I was a chemical engineer. I worked as an engineer for 10 years, doing hardcore engineering, including programming, being a developer for the chemical industry. But then INSEAD changed things quite a bit. I went into the startup world with my clean tech startup, did that for a few years, raised money, and then it went into media, digital media, to turn a lot of brands into online brands. And then finally I decided, okay, I want to match money with brilliant minds, and that's when I launched the accelerator and investment fund in Ukraine, where I was based at that time. But then, due to the political situation, after 3 years of operating and investing in 19 companies, I had to put that project on hold because of the situation in Ukraine. And I was invited to come to Boston and join as director for the Techstars Boston program, which was an amazing experience. I have done 4 classes, almost 50 startups, became an investor into Techstars as well. But now, just recently in June, I have left Techstars to launch One Way Ventures, which is a seed fund to back immigrant entrepreneurs like myself. I am an immigrant from Brazil, and I think immigrants make up for amazing entrepreneurs because of the journey, the experience they go through as they go to another country. And I'm excited to be able to help them create global success stories like many we already know.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing that you're doing. Actually, I have a cousin who is way younger than I am, who has made a movie about immigrants, but in Europe, and he followed them during all their journey, and it's a very hot topic. These people suffer a lot. Here in Europe, we have terrible situations, and I guess that it's like this everywhere. And I think you're absolutely right that they are very powerful people, courageous people, and obviously there is something very interesting to do with them, lots of things to do with them, but I'm not the specialist, you obviously are, so I'm going to let you speak. I'm going to shut up at least for a while. Thank you very much.
Okay, great, thank you. So I guess what I wanted to touch upon today is the fact that to create global companies, sometimes it's inevitable that you need to go beyond the borders of your home country, especially if you are in a country with a small domestic market. Entrepreneurial journey towards a big blockbuster unicorn type of success leads to issues such as immigration and going into a different ecosystem and hitting big in this different ecosystem. So although there's a clear trend towards democratizing startups, the world is still not completely flat when it comes to creating a global company. To make long story short, the success of your startup still depends on being at the right place at the right time. Let me start by saying that this whole conversation today applies only to companies that have that, unicorn ambition, if you will, and most likely they do it with injections of VC funding. If you're not building, a global company, if it's, perfectly fine for you to build what investors call a lifestyle business, or a business for you to generate a comfortable income, grow slowly but surely. And in this case, many of the points being discussed here simply do not apply to you. So why is it that even with the burst of entrepreneurial activity in ecosystems like, Paris and London and Berlin, founders still take the plunge and move to the US? There are many reasons, but I guess we can break it down into a few main points. One is obviously the size of the market. As you know better than me, Europe is a very fragmented market, and no individual country compares with the single US market. The other point is the capital markets. The concentration of capital in the better ecosystems like, San Francisco, Boston, and New York is still way ahead of any other Western ecosystem. In terms of growth, Europe is super interesting, it's ahead, but when it comes to absolute numbers, US is still really unbeatable, which leads to higher valuations, bigger round sizes, and more entrepreneurial friendly terms when you're negotiating your term sheet. So the further you go away from the valley, the lower evaluations, the worse the terms you get. That's just a fact. Not to mention quicker cycles. Investors in the US make very quick decisions. For an angel round, it is not unusual to close it in 2 weeks. For bigger rounds, a month and a half maximum. I was just in Eastern Europe talking to a local VC there, and it surprised me that to sign a $500,000 check, it took them almost 2 months, and several meetings, and getting the blessing from their LPs. That does not take place here in the US. Things happen much quicker. People are more comfortable. They have, more data points to draw conclusions from, and that's the way it is. The other main point, which is probably the biggest differentiator when it comes to ecosystems, in the US and elsewhere, is the M&A activity, the level of M&A activity. The outcomes for startups based in the US can vary dramatically, and more, they are not just failing completely, but they're, being acqui-hired or acquired by a strategic investor. Corporate venture is the fastest growing type of venture investment in the US these days. So it's very likely that the worst case scenario for a startup is not going to be just, plain failure, but to be, incorporated into one of these big, larger companies. And that's the worst case scenario, right? And so many startups are being, acquired by these corporations. So, okay, so I made some points as to why sometimes you really need to go to the US. Not every time, but sometimes. But when exactly do you take the plunge? When do you actually make that move, right? It is obviously, case by case. But if I were to generalize it, I would say that you should get some validation on the business model before moving. You can do it on your local market if the business model allows for it, or in the US from your home country. In other words, you can get your first couple of, contracts or a few hundred users, before moving. That's the earliest I would do if I were, in the shoes of a founder, not in the US. or you can move when you're ready to raise a Series A round. And one thing to keep in mind is that rounds in the US are much different than in Europe, for instance. So rounds in general are floating numbers that, change with time and region, but just, as an FYI, a Series A in the US is something around $5 to $10 million, which is usually more than you consider as a Series A elsewhere. So when are you ready for a Series A and moving to the US, right? Generally speaking, I would say if you have something around $150,000 in monthly recurring revenues, the MRR, then that's a good KPI to, find yourself ready to talk to VCs in the US for a Series A. So if you decided that moving is for you, then comes the decision as to where to go. And I would say that the critical element in choosing what city to move to is recruiting. What ecosystem offers the most qualified talent for your type of startup? So, as you know, recruiting is likely the biggest headache you will have in your whole startup life, believe it or not. It's like, a chronic disease. It never really goes away. And it has such an impact into the growth of your business that, I cannot emphasize enough. So the recruiting strategy is what really separates the mediocre from the great, the zombies from the high growth startups. And if we can be more specific, I would say that, if you're coming from, South America, Europe, and even Asia to the US, the ecosystems that are worth moving to are San Francisco, New York, Boston, and LA. That's it. Yes, there is some level of, activity and capital in many other places, but it's not going to be any better than you would find in your, home country. And as a matter of fact, it can be even worse. So I would really focus in one of those 4 cities that I mentioned: San Francisco, New York, Boston, and LA. But to make the decision even simpler, between those 4 cities, I would choose based on the vertical of your startup, right? So if I am doing anything social or most of anything B2C, which depends highly on brand awareness, creating a new brand and marketing, then I would definitely go to San Francisco. I'll give you an example of a company that we invested through Techstars that was in the business of greeting cards, doing with laser cut structures, pop-up cards. They really needed to create a brand from scratch. They had a very strong e-commerce component. They are Boston-based. They're thriving and growing, but let me tell you, it's really hard to find the kind of talent they needed to create that brand straight to consumers. So they ended up having to look a lot for people, in Silicon Valley and New York for that. Going forward, if I were to do anything in media, entertainment, fashion, or fintech, then I would go to New York. If it is anything around hard tech, robotics, hardware, clean tech, ed tech, education tech, life sciences, biotech, travel, or ed tech, the advertisement tech, then I would come to Boston. Boston is the ecosystem that I know the best, so I can speak for it. Why Boston for robotics and hard tech, hardware? Because of MIT and the whole ecosystem around MIT. You know, as far as clean tech, statewide, there are a number of incentives in Massachusetts for clean tech, a lot of grants, special facilities where you can actually do your pilot production, such as Greentown Labs. You know, education, there's the highest concentration of high-level institutions in the world, probably, over 300,000 students. You know, life sciences, you know, hospitals and medical research institutions, and so on. And travel, there's TripAdvisor and Kayak based in Boston, EdTech, there's HubSpot, so good place. If you're doing gaming, VR, and obviously anything around film industry, I would go to LA. So if your product did not fit into any of the major categories that I just mentioned, then I would just go to the Valley or to New York. Yes, you can, for example, create an education company in the Valley and be successful. You don't have to be in Boston. There's Khan Academy, there's Udemy, among many. Or a social company in LA, there's Snap. But if you don't have any other reason for being at a particular location, then I would use the vertical and the match with local talent as the guide to choose where to go. Your life will be easier, the ecosystem will be ready to host you, and so on. And your business development opportunities right around the corner. So, okay, you decided when to go and where to go, but then there is still, how to go, right? Left. And I'm sure when we think about, how to, take the plunge and go to the US, immigration is in most people's head, especially, nowadays. With the current administration in the White House, it has become very confusing and sometimes even scary to think of immigration. But I wanted to talk concrete terms. The situation is the following. The Trump administration has postponed the implementation of the International Entrepreneurs Rule that would give, foreigners building fast-growing businesses the ability to apply for parole status to work in the US. Typically, that kind of privilege is only given for humanitarian or medical reasons, but this entrepreneurs rule was created, to promote entrepreneurship in the US with the help of immigrants. That was postponed to March 2018, and it may be canceled altogether. And that's bad news. However, there's good news. The good news is that we have lived without this entrepreneurs rule for decades. And somehow we made it work, right? More specifically, there are very good immigration lawyers that do nothing but work with tech entrepreneurs. I myself work with a couple. I have, through these lawyers, helped many founders immigrate to the US, written many recommendation letters, and guess what? I've been successful every time. Not a single rejection. So based on my experience, I can tell you what the options are. If you have a legal entity in your home country and have been listed as a top manager for this company for more than a year, then you get an L1 visa. It costs around $5,000 to $10,000 and it takes about 4 months. If that doesn't apply to you, you just launched the company, you can get an O1 visa for people with extraordinary abilities. No, you don't have to be a genius, Einstein, to apply, to qualify. I've helped 3 people get that visa just this past year. And it is particularly easy for techies. But if the L1 or the O1 do not apply to you, then you can get an H-1B visa through the Global EIR program. In this case, the only requirement is that you spend a handful of hours a month helping the hosting organization with their entrepreneurship program. That's usually a university, You know, in Boston, for instance, Babson and UMass do have the global EIR program, and it takes about 6 months to process, but in the meantime, you can use your ESTA or B1, B2 visa. My point is that visa is manageable, and there are much harder problems to tackle if you have a startup. That should not be a showstopper for you. So the other, point to address when you are, going to the US to create this global success story is what is the best way to get plugged into a particular ecosystem. If you are a super early startup, you have just a functional prototype and a little bit of traction, then I would say an accelerator is a good option. I have worked for Techstars for 3 years. I know from the inside that they do amazing things for entrepreneurs, so I can speak highly for them. But the vast majority of the accelerators out there are a complete waste of time and equity. Let's be honest. Techstars, Y Combinator, and 500 Startups are the ones that without doubt are worth the few points of equity that they request. And if you plan to go to any other accelerator, I would do serious due diligence by talking to a few graduates from that program and get into the facts around the actual value that they got from the program. Did they reach their objective? If it was to raise funds, did they actually, close a round? Or if they are a B2B company, did the accelerator introduce them to people that turned into partners and translated into concrete contracts? Or if, they got exposed to mentors that actually challenged them so much as to, generate a pivot into a much more promising direction. These are the kinds of questions you want to ask accelerator graduates before deciding to apply and to join. There are also some equity-free options, and I believe Mass Challenge is a pretty good one. It's Boston-based, but you need to obviously have ways to pay your bills as you go through these programs because they are equity-free, but they are also money-free. They don't provide any investment. Now, if you are a little bit ahead, more towards the Series A, then I would suggest that you send your core business team here, the CEO, the VP of sales, the CMO, and so on, to open an office, preferably a corner in one of the better co-working spaces, and just do a ton of networking. If you, prior to coming here, had an investment round from a local VC, elsewhere, then that VC most likely is connected to other VCs in the US that can help you get plugged as well. That's part of our value add to help entrepreneurs get plugged into the ecosystem. And that's a good start. And there's also a bunch of, mafias, if you will. There's the Indian mafia and the, Israeli mafia and the French mafia, Canadians and so on. And they all, help their fellow founders to get plugged. There are some, useful organizations. I'm fond of, for example, C100, which connects Canadian founders to a pool of 100 Canadian mentors, typically established investors, founders, experts in, the startup space in the Valley. At One Way Ventures, the VC where I am the founder and managing partner, what we actually want to do is to create the immigrant mafia or the immigrant identity, which will transcend any individual nationality because it will be much more powerful and, it will have immediate critical mass. Because if you are, for instance, a French founder in Boston and another half a dozen French founders, you can't really shake the boat, But if you identify yourself as an immigrant, then there are many, many other immigrants, people that have gone through, similar journey as you, and they share a lot in common with you, and they will be willing to help, you with much more actionable and strong, advice than any VC, for example. But as I say the word immigrant, I'm sure many of you are thinking, oh no, and so does investors, many of them conservative and full of unconscious biases. Yes, sure, I know, you're thinking, the word immigrant has this negative connotation that, it's like a second class of people. But let's be pragmatic here. You need to raise money in the US. If you are a serial entrepreneur, meaning you got a track record, you got exits before, right? At least one exit. Then the fact that you are an immigrant actually helps you a lot. That's because investors here in the US understand that typically they can expect from you a higher level of resilience and determination, the ability to adjust, to create, to build, to overcome obstacles, and deal with any level of ambiguity. You've given up comfort zone in exchange for a chance to succeed at much higher levels, than you would ever if you were to just stay back, home. Not to mention you have a serious competitive advantage because you can typically create R&D centers, your, tech product development team in regions that are much more cost effective. So yes, you will raise easier and faster if you are a serial immigrant entrepreneur. Investors will love you. But if you have no track record, then that's when it gets complicated. Venture investment is grounded on social proofing. Investors wait for the first one to have the leap of faith before jumping on board. And who is the first one, right? One Way Ventures hopes to be that kind of investor, but in general, that's hard. How to make yourself more appealing if you are that, first-time immigrant entrepreneur? I guess the point is you need to take away what makes the local conservative investors uncomfortable. And I'll give you a couple of tips on how to do that. First, you should show with confidence that you are committed to a permanent move to the US. There are ways to show that, like, for example, you get a lease for your apartment. You don't go to an Airbnb, thinking, okay, who knows how long I'll be here, right? You move your family. Investors feel when the founder, himself or herself is not sure about the move, and they become very uncomfortable. Things like, I remember investing in a German company once, and then the CTO came the first day he met me here after we made the offer, they came here, and then the CTO came to me and said, hey, do you know a way for me to get, a temporary phone card? I said, why? Well, because he said, I don't know, I don't want to get into any long-term contracts. Now that right away was a red flag to me because, he himself wasn't sure if his startup was going to work in the US. So we want to see founders go full head into, this move. So just be aware of that. Second tip is I would recommend to find an US co-founder to help you with the business development side. I've seen over and over again startups that have big hustlers. They come here and they think that they're going to figure out how to do business very quickly. They're going to develop their Rolodex, their set of contacts very quickly. They know exactly what to do when it comes to business development. And the truth is that they will go through a learning curve, and by the time they're over with the learning curve, they have run out of cash. So we absolutely suggest that, you know, they try hard to find a, you know, local exec or, you know, a co-founder that has gone through that learning curve, and that will certainly, you know, speed up the process of adjusting and succeeding here. And how do you find that person? Again, you can count on VCs to introduce you to a lot of people. You meet as many people as you can, and don't be afraid to use LinkedIn. Just cold contacting people to, you know, ask for, you know, go out for coffee. And these people don't have to be available. As a matter of fact, most of them will not be available job-wise. They will be, you know, they will have a good position in some company. That's the kind of people you want to approach, and you want to keep meeting them over and over again. You want to keep, you know, building this network of people that you can tap into for now or for the future to recruit them into your company. I'm going to give you one specific example on the impact of adding a, you know, local co-founder. Just last year, we made an offer to this company whose founder is from Kosovo, and he came with his West Coast friend, designer, and it was just, you know, two of them with this technical team in Kosovo. Team-wise, they had many holes, but we decided to make the offer, you know, through Techstars because we were impressed with his technical capabilities, and, you know, they joined, and just a few weeks later, they were able to as co-founder that had a very, very impressive track record. Well, soon after that, they were able to close a seed round of 3.2 million at a valuation that was almost triple of what they just had with us. So, you know, that's the kind of impact that you can get when you have, you know, a team member like that join. And they, after that, were able to hire a very impressive VP of engineering from Strategies, the 3D printing company. So that's just one example of the impact. I guess I've been talking a lot. To wrap up, I wanted to say that the move to the US may be a good option in many cases, and especially for startups with global ambitions. And there's a right time and the right way to do it, and it's very, very doable.
Okay, Eveline, thank you very much. It's impressive, and I feel like it's easy for me now if I want to move to the US because it's crystal clear.
Great.
Yeah, so it's really great. And so I have tons of questions, as you can imagine, about everything that you're saying. The first one is that, how many, have you got any ideas right now about the number of startups from Europe or all around the world who are trying to go in the US and actually make it successfully right now? What's the situation in the US?
Yes, there is still a lot. I am constantly contacted by different organizations trying to bridge Europe with the US, especially government organizations such as, you know, Switzerland has a program, Estonia, a number of countries in Europe have that kind of bridging program. Although in the last 6 months, people have become a little bit more skeptical because of the, you know, the rhetoric around immigration. It hasn't stopped people, but they have become a little bit more skeptical, and they try to address the visa issue right away versus, you know, postponing for later. So I don't know numbers, but I do know one number, which is about a quarter of all VC-backed companies in the US have an immigrant founder from somewhere. Okay. And, yeah, and over half of the unicorns have immigrant founders.
Okay, so in that case, because it's quite a lot of companies, how do you explain that the current VC fund, in the landscape, the VC funds still hesitate to invest in companies where there is an immigrant? Because the numbers are good. If it's 25% of companies, I guess that the number of companies who succeed are at least 25% or maybe more. I don't know, I might be wrong, but it looks weird.
Well, so over half of the unicorns out there today have an immigrant founder. So even though just a quarter have an immigrant founder when they're backed, first invested, more than half of the unicorns have immigrant founders, which leads you to believe that the chances of success are much higher when you have that immigration component in the team, which is not surprising at all because of all the things we discussed around the character of people that have gone through this immigration experience. Now, the VC ecosystem in the US is still very, white and male and
okay.
And local. That has been changing. They have been going out and reaching out, especially to Europe, in the very recent past. For example, Union Square Ventures has quite a bit of exposure to European startups. They have really gone out there. So that's kind of like a different type of VC. But it's just that typically you relate to, people that are more similar to you, right? So if you have that kind of those kind of partners in the VCs, then that's who they relate to, So it's just kind of like, part of, being human, right? You relate to the people who are similar to you, and therefore you keep on sourcing from those, same people, same demographics. And also, I have to say that, in One Way Ventures, for example, the fact that I have lived in different ecosystems, in Europe, in Brazil, and in the US, have expanded my horizons and my ability to tap into these ecosystems and source companies. Not only I feel comfortable with them, not only I can relate to them, but I also have ways to reach out to people that have vetted companies, and these people can send me their best startups.
Okay, so about One Way Ventures, because obviously it is in the DNA of your fund to do things in a much wiser way. How do you plan to select the companies in which you want to invest? What are your criteria? Is it based on industries? Is it based on what, basically? How do you plan to work?
The main criteria is actually to have in the founding team a person who has a character deeply shaped by some sort of immigration experience. But beyond that, as far as industry goes, we are going to stick with tech and tech only. And within tech, we're pretty broad. So we are, going to be looking at B2B, B2C, SaaS, enterprise, hardware, IoT, any tech, except biotech and life sciences, because we don't feel like we have the expertise and the network to help such companies. But everything else that is digitally enabled, we are very happy to take a look at. And as far as where we're going to source, for Fund 1, we are going to be sourcing, a lot in Boston because, of our network at MIT and Harvard and, other places within the Boston ecosystem. But I will also be tapping into my connections in Europe and South America for these teams. So if I had to say how the portfolio is going to look like, I would say, a good half of it will be coming from, regionally Boston and New York, of course, with immigrant founders, but, kind of like these regional ecosystem here, some from the West Coast, and the other half perhaps coming straight from these other regions and coming to the US to join us and receive investment from us.
You said before during the discussion that the VC world is a lot of white male people. So you're a woman, and there are lots and lots of more and more of women who are entrepreneurs. And in France, we can see it. It's really good, and actually, it's nice. Actually, I really love the way they work, and there were lots of scandals in the US lately in the VC industry. Since you are a woman and you are in this world, in this industry, in this ecosystem, how do you feel it? Is it so bad as we heard here, or is it basically like everywhere?
I would say it's great to create awareness. The issue exists, obviously, by the testimonials we've seen recently. Obviously, it's an issue, and the more it creates awareness, and the better it gets. People, get more conscious and start acting on it. But I also see a lot of positive, trends. For example, quite a few VCs that are specifically targeting the female demographics. Such as, in Boston, we have a new, recently launched VC called the X Factor. And there are, a few others that, focus on that. So I see that positive trend. Perhaps what's missing is a little bit of a proactive approach when it comes to partners in these VCs. Perhaps as a way to jumpstart the process, there should be a mandate in some of these VCs to have diversity in the partnership. So I think, in some cases in history, as we know, that kind of like more proactive approach was needed to create major change. And perhaps that's needed in the VC world as well, to put on the mandate for, for the LPs to demand that kind of diversity in the partnership would be interesting. Personally, I've been blessed. I don't think I've ever, felt any sort of, discrimination or any issues because of my gender. But I do realize that that's an issue for many other people.
Okay. You said before as well something about accelerators and this type of structure, like a real due diligence has to be done. Here in Europe, it's the same. It's the boom of accelerators, which sell good things and bad things. What do you expect? What is the type of service that you should expect if you join an accelerator? What is good? What is wrong? Because if you don't know, it might be difficult to identify. So in Techstars, for instance, it has such a great reputation. What did you find? How do you explain that it's way, way, way better than the others?
Mm-hmm. I think the secret to success for Techstars, and maybe in general, is there's no cookie cutter formula. The accelerator, to be effective, should give to you what you need, and not some kind of like general formula that works for everybody. So whatever your expectation is coming into the accelerator, then the team should try its best to meet those expectations. That's one. The other thing is, I think the powerful connections that you can make with the other founders in the accelerator is really what makes the difference. And that is probably the secret sauce for Techstars. It's not so much what the directors of the accelerators and the mentors can give to the founders as what the founders can give to each other. Techstars invests a lot in the alumni, the alumni network, and providing all kinds of ways for them to help each other. And I think that is the secret behind the 90% active companies KPI, for Techstars. One thing specifically that we did at Techstars Boston is we had a weekly CEO meeting between, the company CEOs, where they addressed the really tough questions. And that meeting went beyond the period of the acceleration program for life, basically. And so they stayed connected and helping each other in meaningful ways for life.
Okay. You saw many companies in your career, and many you tried to succeed in the US coming from abroad. You said that one mistake was that they didn't work with a local founder, which could really speed up the entry on the market. And you also said that it might be also possible to work with a technical team abroad because it might be less expensive. So basically it means that, if I'm right, if I understand you well, a local founder for all business development and stuff like this, but technical could be abroad. Is it something like this? Is there any other tips, stuff that you saw that works, and things that must be avoided at any price?
Yeah, definitely. That's the formula you just mentioned is what I've seen succeed. To keep the technical team at a cost-effective region, and to create in the US the presence that is related to customer acquisition, nurturing, engagement, and of course investor relations. So that's the formula that I've seen, succeed, and that's where, the immigrant founders do better than most, because they're not scared of this formula. They know exactly what they have to do, and that's their, one of their biggest competitive advantages, that they know how to make this formula work for them. And if you think about it, that also creates a team that is 24/7, productive. A lot of times if they're in different time zones.
Okay, so if I wanted to know about One Way Venture, when do you plan, maybe it has been done already, to plan your first investment? Is there a timetable for you? How do you see it? And can we already send you some resume, executive summaries or companies, and how to join you? Is it already possible?
So One Way will have its first closing this month, which means which means in November we will start looking at companies and making investments. So I would say in 2 to 3 weeks from now, absolutely, you can send me your executive summary, or a few words, and we'll schedule the interview.
Congratulations, that's the first thing. And I don't know if it was your first time to raise from LPs. Is it different from raising money in your own startup? Is a fund in the end exactly like a regular startup, or is it different? Do you talk differently to investors?
It certainly feels like a startup. So I developed that much more empathy for founders going through the process. I can relate a lot. So yeah, it does feel like a startup. And not only because it is time consuming, fast paced, pitching day and night, getting a lot of rejection, celebrating the few, victories, all of that. But it's also, in our case, because we are in a way mission driven. I believe that startups have a higher chance of success if they feel really passionate about their problem they're trying to solve. And in our case, it's beyond just, a financial transaction, creating a fund, investing, making money. Yes, we are planning to do that, but it's also about creating this, immigrant identity and, backing people that is just, very special people that we relate to, and kind of like creating a little bit of a positive impact in the middle of so much negativity these days towards globalization. So that drives us even more towards, you know, getting it done, you know, and start investing and meeting these wonderful founders and helping them succeed.
Actually, it's quite refreshing to hear this, because the idea of VCs we sometimes have is a very cynical people who are not idealistic at all. And what you've just said is quite the opposite. So that's actually very nice. We're coming close to the end of this radio show. I always end with the same question I ask everyone. It's about music, actually, because music is also about life, and entrepreneurship is a lot about music, maybe for some people. Is there a special music for you that relate to your life, relate to your entrepreneurship path, to everything that you've just done? Is there something you're thinking of? If it's not too private, of course.
I guess I would say I'm a little bit of a dual person after my life history. So the two, I would have to say two music, two types of songs. One would be, if I need that extra level of energy, then I put some, you know, axé, which is the Brazilian carnival music from the Northeast, my hometown. And that just gives me that extra energy forever. But if I just want to be focused and humble and understand that we are here like a small grain in this universe of possibilities, then I like to listen to the Ukrainian anthem, the national anthem of Ukraine, which is really a lesson of, you know, overcoming all kinds of obstacles and, you know, succeeding.
Okay, so Eveline, thank you very much again for the time you spent. Thank you very much for all the tips. Everything you said is very valuable, I can tell you, and really, it was really, really great. The next session, normally we are going to receive another great entrepreneur. Is a French guy called Martin Gentil, and who is the business model specialist I know. Is in I think in his business, he had to change his business model about 10 different times, and he's still alive. And actually, this guy is amazing. And we're going to learn a lot about agility in business models. And he's definitely one of the best guys I know to talk about this. So, Eveline, thank you very much. It was great. And I wish you good luck. And I hope to see you around at INSEAD or in the US or anywhere. Thank you very much.
See you at the reunion.
Okay.
Bye.
Goodbye.